Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I appreciate you getting back on here and following the series. This is going to be my second episode and my most productive baits. So these are tried and true baits that I took straight out of the tackle box, and I'm going to let out all the juice I have and let you know how I catch them. This last week it was on the Dirty Digs Luke Clawson Finesse Jig, and this week, continuing with jigs, it will be the Dirty Jigs Mh Swim Jig. So whenever you go on their website, and I'm not sponsored by Dirty Jigs at all. I just happen to like their jigs. Whenever you go on their website, it'll just say Swim Jig. It's kind of their general version, and whenever you read in the description, it'll say the Coosa River version. I live near the Coosa River, and what that means, they sell four different types. So the Coosa River is like a good, strong, sturdy hook. It'll get you about 95% of the time, unless you live if I lived on Gunnersville or down in Florida or Clear Lake, Delta, stuff like that, where there are a lot more grass and a lot more cover. They do sell a no jack version, and that's just a lot beefier hook. And then they sell a finesse version, which that would be, I could see that being good, but if you want one good all around, the regular swim jig, that's the one to have. And whenever I said that I'm going to say things that work for me, that's really what I'm going to do here. I'm not going to tell you what other people, what they think is the best and all that, because you can listen to every pro, and almost all of them are going to say a 1/4 ounce jig is the way to go. That skips better, and it's just the right weight. A 3/8 kind of allows me to do a lot of different things, so I only carry the 3/8. I kind of gotten down to where most of the baits I throw, I really only throw them, well, not all of them, but as many as I could. I got down to one weight. That way I didn't have to carry as many baits. I've actually got my jig box right here. So I took them right out of my plain old jig box. So here you go. I throw them in the 3/8 Dirty Digs Swim Jig, and these are the colors that I throw. First, the white. The white's going to be best around shad spawn in the fall. One of the fish are feeding on shad. Second is a black and blue, or black and blue purple. That's a great color too. They sell that online. Black blue purple. I think it's bruised something. That's a great color as well. But that'd be, I'm either going to go for black in low light conditions or a little bit dirtier water. So this would be my dirty water version. A swim jig really isn't going to work in the dirtiest water because, and you can add rattles to them, but it doesn't have any sound, so it's not something that's going to attract the fish from a long way. So you kind of need a little bit of visibility in the water, not too much, but at least 6 inches, let's say. So there you go, black and blue for dirtier water. Like I said in my last video, I like something with orange. If I'm on that crawfish kind of deal in the spring, this is green pumpkin orange, I think, or Bama crawl. Bama crawl's color. So a green pumpkin orange, because I like that orange belly in the spring. I think it just kind of, those a little bit brighter colors, especially oranges and yellows, things like that, they really key in on that. And this one, I hate to give up this color because this is probably my favorite and the one I don't tell anybody about, but that's the Alabama Brim. And that color right there is kind of the deal. I love this color. This is my go-to, I would say. And it's just a good brim imitator. They sell a lot of bluegill color baits. I don't always really like those. They don't look like the bluegill around here, but this Alabama brim looks, maybe because I live in Alabama, it looks like them. So you can see here, same way in the last video, I do cut down the weed guard just a little bit, so whenever it barely touches it, because it just increases your hookup ratio a lot. And then for the trailers I use, I usually kind of cut these, but don't cut them straight because nothing out in nature is just straight across, no sharp edges. So kind of cut it this way. Then you get a little bit shorter because you want your trailer to get all the action it can. If your skirt is hitting the paddle tail or whatever you have moving on the back of your bait, if you have anything moving, then this would be, you want to trim it up a little bit so it doesn't touch it. So those are colors: white, green pump, Bama crawl, Alabama Brim and black and blue, or black and blue purple, something in there. I use it on 100% of the time. And maybe if I were up on the Mississippi River or somewhere where there's really clear water, I usually just don't throw it. Like if I go to Logan Martin or Lake Martin here in Alabama, Smith Lake, I'm really not going to go to a swim jig a whole lot. It wouldn't be my go-to, so I wouldn't necessarily think that I need to go to fluorocarbon. So I throw it on 50-pound braid. I found that 50-pound works the best for me. It keeps me from, because this bait, I'm really skipping it. And I'll talk about my rod a lot too, because a rod is super important for this. I skip it a lot under docks, under trees, under overhangs. This is a 4x4 lure, and that's how you're using it. Instead of being a flipping jig where you're going straight up and down, or a finesse jig where you could be casting it or skipping it, a swim jig is really a horizontal presentation. So you're putting it up into something and then bringing it back out. And a lot of times you're throwing a swim jig in just the absolute nastiest places you can. And that's what you're doing with a swim jig. If I were going to teach somebody to fish around grass, it'd be with a swim jig. That'd be the first bait I'd start out with, because it absolutely catches them. So I throw 50-pound braid. I throw 50-pound vicious. I bought thousands of yards of vicious braid off Gerald Swindle like 8 years ago. I think he was leaving Vicious. And I bought this from Darian Craig, who was his assistant at the time, who now runs Y'all Sweet Tea, and he's got his own YouTube channel, Darian is Fishing. He was his assistant, and he was selling stuff. And yeah, I bought thousands of yards of this vicious braid, and it's great braid, it really is. So I use 50-pound braid for everything. I still have probably, I don't know, maybe 1,000 yards left, so I'm getting down to the end of it. But whenever I do, I'm going to buy more 50-pound vicious braid. It's been great. So I use 50-pound vicious braid, and the rods I use, the first one and the one that I'm going to use the most, and you can see I have Falcon Rod shirt on. I'm not sponsored by them. I just really like Falcon rods. There's a few different brands that I go back in between because I don't have a sponsor. But the Low Rider, it's a great series. I think it's $130. It's a great in-between rod. Real durable, looks good, real classy, cork handles, high quality rod. But some rods you just don't need the highest end, like the Expert or the Kara, the more $200, $250 rods. So that Low Rider is a good in-between for like a frog rod, swim jig rod, things where you don't really need, they're more visual, where you don't need to, like you're not dragging something. Whenever you're dragging a bait, those are going to be the rods that you need a little bit more high quality rod where you can feel the bites rather than it just being, just being visual most of the time. So I use and it is a really light rod. It says it's a medium heavy, so it's the LFC 72 Mh Swim Jig. It's a 5-power, medium heavy, medium fast. So it's got a little bit, the taper, the power in the rod starts a little bit later. So a little, the tip is super soft. So it's got a real bouncy tip. And it's 7.2 foot long, 7.2, and a split grip. So, but it says it can throw in between an 1/8 ounce and a 3/4 ounce bait. It's $130. Great rod. 90% of the time, this is a rod that I use, unless I'm in those situations like Gunnersville, like Florida, where it's around just a lot of cover, maybe Caddo Lake. There's some really just super heavy cover lakes where I go to. I buy my Falcon rods from Summerland Outdoors, who I'm sponsored by. It's a great shop. You can buy them online. They have all the rods. That's how they actually start out. And also I have an Evergreen 7.2, or it's actually a 7.3 heavy worm and jig rod, and that's a good if you're on a heavy cover lake. But I really do. I like that more flexible rod because how you're setting the hook on them, it's not a regular jig hook set where you're, cracking a whip on them. You're really reeling into them and then setting just with a side sweep. You're setting the hook. So it's more like a crankbait. And that's really how you can think about this, is a swim jig is a 4x4 crankbait. It can go anywhere, kind of like it really is just a chatterbait without the blade. So anywhere you can throw a chatterbait, this is something that goes even further up in those places. So if you're a big chatterbait guy, a swim jig is going to be obviously a little bit more subtle. So, you know, days when the bite gets a little bit tougher. In places where you need to get even further up into the, you know, up into wherever it is that you're throwing. And it skips better than chatterbait as well. So those would be the advantages over a chatterbait, because it's really pretty much the same thing. Chatterbait without the blade. So you could throw it on some of the same kind of gear, a graphite rod. I definitely wouldn't go fiberglass with this, like Brett Height does with his chatterbaits, but somewhere maybe the same gear. Some people are going to overlap with the same gear. That would be fine. So the 7.2 Swim Jig low rodder from Falcon, that's what I use, or the 7.3 heavy worm and jig rod from Evergreen. That's $200 rod. Great rod as well. They make great line. Real durable rods. They're not the lightest, but it is a good kayak rod, because I really beat my stuff up. Just transport, like everybody does, transporting in your truck, putting it in the kayak, things like that. It's a good durable rod. It's got like Japanese writing on it, so it's kind of bitching too. I don't know, I just think that JDM stuff's cool. So trailers, there's two different trailers I use. Now, I wish I could give you a hard and fast reason why I use one or the other, but I really can't. I'm sponsored by X-Zone. You can see X-Zone in the back. I use the X-Zone 3.5-inch swimmer. There you go. You can see it right there. You can get off their website. They make a lot of great baits, and you know what? There's a lot of different baits that they make that are great. And this is one of them. The 3.5-inch swimmer, it goes perfect with the regular Coosa River version of the Dirty Digs Swim Jig. So they also sell a California Swim Jig where it's got more of a, I think the hook has a little bit longer shank, so you could use a longer swim bait. And on that one, I would go to the 4-inch. I haven't used that one before, but if you're out in California, or you just 100% of the time want to go with a swim bait trailer, maybe that California Swim Jig version would be better, and the 4-inch X-Zone swimmer. But the colors I use are the bluegill. The bluegill has a little bit of purple in there, so that goes great with the Alabama Brim. That's the color for that. Black, which I don't have with me, that would obviously go with the black and blue. White, going to go with that white swim jig. And then, last but not least, I don't have a color I would use with the Bama Cross, so I would just use a green pumpkin trailer swammer, or there's a couple different colors that kind of go with it. Bluegill, you could put bluegill in there too. It's mostly green pumpkin, that would be fine. And last but not least, and you can kind of mix this up. Let's say you're going a little bit more, if you're in clear water, I go with the 309, which I don't have this one, but it's pretty close. It's going to make sense that if the water's clear and I'm still using braid, I'm going to go with the 309 because it's a little bit more translucent like this. And this is more of a shad kind of profile. This one is sexy shad, and they also sell electric shad. Both of those are excellent. I swap those out back and forth. I like both of them. But the white and the electric shad or sexy shad, if the water is a little bit clearer, that's what I'll go to. Or the 309 with this instead of the bluegill. If the water clears up a little bit, the 309 and the Alabama Brim Swim Jig, those look great too. And then secondly is the 3.5-inch, if you want a cross style trailer, the 3.5-inch Adrenaline Craw Junior. That's a great bait. It's got a flapping tail. I'll pull one out here. There you go. You can see it right there. It's got this one's a little bit bent, but you can just boil it for a second and that's fine. But there you go. You have the Adrenaline Craw Junior. That goes perfect on there. It's great. It's like the perfect size. You can see fits on there real good. They also sell, if you're around a little bit bigger fish and you want to go with a little bit bigger bait, they also sell the regular Adrenaline Craw. I think it's 4.25 inches, and that would be my choice if I were around a little bit bigger fish. So a lot of the colors are going to be the same that I'm going to use both in the last video. And I overlap a lot of my soft plastics. I do that on purpose because I want to carry the least amount possible. So here's the color I was talking about in the swammers that I didn't have with me. But it's the 309. There you go, 309. It's more like a translucent, a little bit more see-through. One side's pearlescent and the other side's like a light, real light kind of watermelon with a purple flake in there. And bruh, put them two together. That's where it's at. So that 309, I'm going to use that with my Alabama Brim. Green pumpkin blue. So if I'm a little bit, water's a little bit dirtier with that Alabama Brim or with the green pumpkin orange, I just go with the green pumpkin blue. That's a great color. Black and blue. Can't beat that. Obviously with the black and blue swim jig. Alabama crawl. That's that green pumpkin orange. I'm going to use that with my green pumpkin orange. Alabama crawl jig. And white. Can't beat white. Just white's good. Shows up real good in the dirty water. And whenever they're on shad, it's the color. It's the go-to color. But yeah, those are two. I would say, and if you want to learn how to swim a jig, there's a video called Power Swimming a Jig by Randy Howell, who actually isn't from here, but he learned from a guy around here on how to do that Alabama shake and why you do it and why it works so well. And that's the same thing I do a lot of the time. A swim jig is really, you're just giving it some action. You're doing something with it. You're skipping it. You can even flip with it, and that's why it's so versatile. You can do a little bit of everything with a swim jig. Give it that shake, and whenever you have that little bit lighter rod, lighter power rod in the Falcon swim jig rod, it is really light, so it gives the bait a whole lot of action, just makes it look lifelike. So I would usually use, if I'm trying to either slow my bait down, where I want it to be a little bit higher in the water column, because I do use a 3/8 ounce jig, I would probably go with the swammer, and that just keeps it up a little, keeps it a little bit higher in the water column. Or if I'm really just probably, let's say 75% of the time, I'm going to go with the Adrenaline Crawl Junior. It works. Some people do their trailer vertical. I promise you, I've caught thousands of fish on a swim jig. They don't care. If them tails are like, I think the same thing on a chatterbait. If them tails are like that, they're not getting that close and looking at it and say, oh, nah, that tail's sideways. I can't bite that. That's not happening. So there you go. That's my swim jig. If you're really looking to fish a swim jig, or just fish a jig in general, especially if you have grass, any kind of cover around your lake, excuse me, man, a swim jig is a great place to start. Just any kind of medium heavy rod's fine, until you can get a better rod for it. It's fine. 7.2, 7.3, excuse me. I would say that's probably the 7.2 or 7.3 for me is the right length. Bill Lowen's really big on swim jig rod fishing, and he uses like an extra heavy rod, or like a heavy plus. I think it's 7.6. I don't understand that, and maybe it's the cover they fish is a little bit different. If I lived down in Florida, I probably would throw a little bit heavier rod and maybe a little bit longer. But most of the time, whenever I'm on a kayak, because I'm putting this jig a little bit everywhere, you don't need the extra length because you're not bomb casting it. Unless you're on a grass flat, and that would be whenever you would need a heavier rod, like a 7.3, a heavy rod, because maybe you are casting it a little bit longer. But really, because you want something a little bit shorter, the 7.2, so you can still skip it, so you can still flip it, so you can, it's just 4x4. You're throwing it everywhere. If there's a log, I don't know how many I've caught off logs, any kind of timber, just anywhere, any kind of cover, you're getting it in there. You are getting this 50-pound braid and a good medium heavy rod, and this hook, I might have flexed one out once or twice, like in the life of me throwing these swim jigs on a big fish. I might have lost a couple because of the hook. So I think, like, man, 90, let's say I've caught, 600 fish, and I've only lost 2 because I actually think I flexed the hook out because I was in such heavy cover. I like those odds. That's why I'm almost always staying with this one rather than the bigger hook, no jack. I just think the hookup ratio, because the hook's a little bit smaller, is the way to go. So yeah, good luck out there. If y'all have any questions, or if there's any other trailers that you're really into, I've used a lot of other ones. You can use other trailers. Obviously, I love X-Zone. I think they make the best baits on the market, so that's what I use right now. But I've used some other ones that are, really, really good too. So you're good if you like some other ones. If you have any questions, put them below, or definitely welcome to message me on any of my social media. Y'all have a good night, and thanks for watching.